The Janitor's Son. A ghost in the hallways of privilege at St. Aldridge. Preparatory Academy, prestige wasn't just tradition, it was identity. The school was a monolith of heritage and elitism, wrapped in ivy-covered walls and a carefully cultivated reputation. The students who roamed its marble corridors didn't just come to learn, they came to inherit power. From the outside, it was a sanctuary of learning. On the inside, it was a stage where privilege danced, and everyone else watched from the shadows. Among them was Eli Calder. Eli wasn't one of the chosen. He wasn't born into wealth or fame. He didn't arrive in chauffeured sedans, nor did his last name unlock doors. His father, Richard Calder, was the head janitor, an old man with calloused hands and silent eyes who scrubbed the sins of the institution long after the lights were out. Eli's presence at St. Aldridge was tolerated under the guise of a staff family education initiative. But everyone knew what that really meant. He was there because he was cheap, not because he belonged. From the first day, Eli understood his place. He wasn't just ignored, he was erased. Teachers often skipped over him, either by accident or design. He was never chosen for group projects. His presence barely acknowledged during classroom discussions. The wealthier students looked through him, or worse, mocked him openly when they were bored. Mop boy, they called him. Trash baby. If he ever stood up for himself, it only made things worse. At St. Aldridge, hierarchy was sacred, and Eli had been born at the bottom. But what no one realized, what no one even considered, was that Eli saw everything. He saw the deals made. Behind closed doors, he saw the teacher who flirted her way into promotions, the counselor who funneled confidential files to parents for donations, the student who hacked the grading system and wasn't expelled because his father sat on the board. He heard it all. Too, because when you're invisible, people don't hide their secrets from you. They assume you're too stupid, too weak, too irrelevant to matter. And Eli took advantage of every second of that miscalculation. Each day, while others boasted about Ivy League aspirations or whispered about exotic vacations, Eli listened, observed, memorized. He wasn't just surviving, he was collecting, and he wrote it all down. In a small, battered leather journal that once belonged to his grandfather, Eli chronicled everything. Not just facts and names, but thoughts, patterns, injustices. His entries weren't just reactive, they were analytical, surgical. He noted when and where money exchanged hands, how favors were granted, which teachers looked the other way, and which students were protected no matter what they did. The book had a name, The Witness Project. It began as therapy, a way for Eli to cope. But over time, it evolved into something else, something colder, sharper. He realized he wasn't just writing a diary, he was building a weapon. And with every passing day, the blade grew longer. The school's culture of arrogance only fueled him. Dean Alistair Greaves, the reigning authority at St. Aldridge, was a walking symbol of the corruption. A man who preached integrity at assemblies while cutting backroom deals with donors. His voice echoed in every hallway, praising excellence while silencing dissent. Eli had seen him lie. He'd heard the threats. He watched him destroy a teacher's career with a single forged accusation, all because she refused to pass a student who didn't earn it. And still, no one said a word. Because at St. Aldridge, fear was currency, and silence was policy. But Eli wasn't afraid, not anymore. He knew something the others didn't. Power can't survive exposure. It only thrives in darkness. So Eli made it his mission to drag that darkness into the light. But he wasn't reckless. He didn't scream or protest. That's not how you take down a fortress like St. Aldridge. You infiltrate it. You blend in so well they forget you're even there. And then, when the moment is right, you strike. Not with fists, but with truth. That moment would come. It would be televised, and it would begin with a letter. But before we get there, you must understand who Eli truly was. He wasn't just a boy enduring injustice. He was a strategist, a ghost with a memory like steel, a witness to every whisper in the corridors of the powerful. And his silence was never weakness. It was preparation. So now, to you watching this, I ask, have you ever felt ignored or underestimated in a place where everyone else seemed to belong? Have you ever been treated like your presence didn't matter? Your story might seem small, but it could be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their strength. Drop your experience in the comments below. Let's make the invisible visible. Together. Behind polished walls. The culture of fear. Inside the institution. From the moment you stepped through the iron gates of St. Aldridge Preparatory Academy, you felt it. That heavy, invisible presence that hung in the air like the scent of old money and buried secrets. The kind of presence that made you lower your voice without knowing why, that made even the most seasoned professionals second-guess their words. It wasn't just a school, it was a machine. And like all great machines, it ran on a single unyielding fuel: control. To the outside world, St. Aldridge was a beacon. It boasted test scores in the top 1% nationwide, a 100% Ivy League acceptance rate, and alumni who ruled industries, governed nations, and controlled narratives. But inside, past the manicured gardens and the Baroque architecture, the IE foundation was rotting. The rot was subtle, surgical, invisible to the naked eye, but omnipresent to those who dared look closer. Fear was not shouted at St. Aldridge, it was whispered. And in those whispers, the culture of silence was enforced more brutally than any public reprimand ever could be. It started at the top. Dean Alistair Greaves was more than an administrator. He was the system itself. Charismatic, impeccably dressed, always just outraged enough in public to seem empathetic, yet coldly efficient in private. He spoke in metaphors and veiled threats, wrapped in compliments that made your skin crawl. To the school board, he was a visionary. To the staff, he was untouchable. To the students, he was a god. And gods do not tolerate defiance. There was a reason Greaves had survived 5 separate internal investigations over the years. Complaints disappeared. Emails went unanswered. Meetings were scheduled and canceled repeatedly until the complainant gave up or graduated. No one ever saw the bodies fall. They just vanished. Teachers who refused to inflate grades quietly resigned. Staff who questioned funding discrepancies found their departments restructured. Even parents who dared push too hard found their calls unanswered. They were reminded, gently, always gently, that acceptance to St. Aldridge was a privilege, not a right. Within this system, a hidden hierarchy ruled every interaction. Students like Emma Worthing, daughter of a tech billionaire, could skip classes and still earn honors. Marcus Haverly, whose father funded the new science wing, once punched a classmate and received peer counseling as punishment. Meanwhile, scholarship students like Rosa Alvarez, whose only sin was poverty, were reprimanded for uniform violations and tardiness caused by public transport delays. But no one protested, because St. Aldridge taught obedience as its core curriculum. It rewarded silence with opportunity, and punished truth with exile. Some students adapted. They learned to keep their heads down, their voices soft, their ambitions contained. Others became part of the machine, mimicking the cruelty they once feared. A few broke, quietly, without ceremony, and in the middle of it all moved Eli Calder. He did not belong. He was not part of any clique. No legacy behind his name, no fortune to shield him. But what he had, what none of them considered, was vision. Eli saw the system not as an outsider, but as a shadow within it. Every morning, he passed through those gates not as a student, but as a sentinel. While others reveled in ignorance, he mapped the terrain. He noted the changes in hallway traffic. He memorized which rooms were kept locked and who had keys. He observed how the dean's assistant always lost certain memos, and how records were occasionally corrected late at night. He watched how the janitorial staff, his father's colleagues, were treated like ghosts, spoken about as if they weren't there, and how they, in turn, passed unnoticed through every corner of the school. He realized something profound. True power didn't reside in the offices or the classrooms. It resided in silence, in invisibility. And so, he used it. Eli began compiling patterns, the same students in detention who were later seen at off-campus events hosted by board members. The same teachers reprimanded for unprofessional behavior who had previously expressed dissatisfaction with Dean Greaves's policies. Every date, every quote, every anomaly was recorded in the Witness Project, his secret dossier of the institution's sins. He wasn't planning revenge. Not yet. He was studying anatomy, because to dismantle a monster, you must first know how it breathes. What unnerved him the most wasn't the corruption. Corruption is predictable. It follows patterns, motives, incentives. What haunted Eli was the indifference, the complete emotional detachment of those in power. The way students like Marcus bragged about cheating in front of teachers who pretended not to hear. The way those teachers would later toast to another successful term at faculty dinners, sipping wine funded by the same donors they privately resented. It was systemic apathy disguised as professionalism, and yet no one rebelled. Because everyone believed they were alone, that their unease was personal, that their fears were exaggerated, and that was the genius of it all. Dean Greaves didn't just control through authority, he isolated through silence. He made sure no one saw the full picture. He ensured that complaints felt like aberrations, not patterns. But Eli saw the pattern. He was the pattern. And with every passing day, he grew more convinced that the system's greatest strength, its control over perception, was also its most fragile weakness. Because the truth doesn't need to be shouted. It only needs to be heard once. And when it is, it spreads like fire. So Eli waited, watched, documented. And somewhere, buried in that corrupted institution, the first spark had already been lit. Mockery and silence, the cost of not fitting. In at St. Aldridge, cruelty wore a smile. It wasn't loud or overt, not always. It was sophisticated, wrapped in sarcasm, served with laughter. Disguised as tradition, it passed from one generation to the next, like a treasured heirloom. And the ones who bore the weight of that cruelty were always the same. Those who didn't belong. Eli Calder didn't belong. He didn't have the designer shoes, the manicured haircuts, the self-assured gait of the elite. He didn't laugh at the same jokes or pretend to enjoy the school's stiff social rituals. He sat alone at lunch, walked alone between classes, And in a place like St. Aldridge, solitude wasn't neutral. It was an invitation to mock, to humiliate, to break. It started small. Someone scribbled Maintenance Junior on his locker with a Sharpie. Another time, someone left a mop propped against his seat in class. One day, he opened his notebook to find the pages soaked in toilet water. No one ever got caught. No one even looked guilty. And when Eli reported it, once, he was told by the assistant principal with a condescending chuckle, "Try to blend in a little more, Eli. It'll help." So he stopped reporting. And the pranks escalated. His chair was glued in place before an exam, making him fall in front of the entire class. His name was replaced on the debate roster with Janitor's Pet. His school ID photo was digitally altered and spread through group chats with captions like "Custodian in Training." When he passed through the halls, whispers followed. When he entered a room, the air changed, tightened, but Eli never cracked. He didn't retaliate. He didn't cry. He didn't even flinch. Because while they laughed, Eli took notes. Every time someone thought they were clever, he remembered. Every insult became a record in his ledger. He tracked times, dates, locations, and, most importantly, patterns. Who instigated? Who watched? Who laughed the loudest? Who looked away? His silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. He realized early on that St. Aldridge didn't just operate on social capital. It thrived on complicity. Bullies weren't reprimanded because they were the sons and daughters of donors. Witnesses said nothing because they feared becoming the next target. And administrators ignored it all because acknowledging it would mean confronting the rotten truth of the institution's culture. So Eli embraced his role, the ghost, the outcast, the punchline, because no one fears the quiet one. And that was their first mistake. Behind his blank stare was a storm of calculation. Every time he was excluded from a party or left out of a group project, he studied the dynamics. Why did they follow that leader? What fear kept them compliant? What hidden alliances shaped their cruelty? He wasn't just enduring. He was infiltrating. Eli's desk drawer at home became an archive. Printed screenshots of group messages, photos of vandalism, journal entries documenting conversations, threats, gestures, recordings of hallway taunts captured on a cheap audio, pen clipped to his backpack strap. He stored everything in labeled folders, encrypted and duplicated in cloud backups. His humiliation was his camouflage, and no one saw the truth. Not when they shoved him against lockers. Not when they knocked his books to the floor and chuckled as he picked them up. Not when they tripped him in the cafeteria and cheered as spaghetti stained his shirt. Because in their eyes, Eli Calder was no one. But they were wrong. He was everyone. They feared, because Eli wasn't building a case for pity. He was building a case for exposure. He studied their hierarchy the way an entomologist studies an ant colony. Dispassionately, meticulously. He understood how the queen, in this case Dean Greaves, controlled the hive. How the soldiers, students, like Marcus Haverly, enforced the rules, and how the workers, teachers and staff, kept the machine running without ever asking why. The system was airtight until someone saw every crack, and that someone was Eli. What they failed to understand was that the more they laughed, the more powerful he became. Every joke chipped away at their mask. Every shove offered him insight into their fear. Every prank revealed the lengths they would go to in order to maintain their illusion. And when the time came, that illusion would shatter. Because the boy they mocked wasn't a victim. He was an architect, and his silence was the blueprint of their unraveling. The invisible mentor, a janitor who knows. Too much, Richard Calder had always been overlooked, and he had learned to survive that way. In the rigid hierarchy of St. Aldridge, janitors were less than furniture. They moved through the corridors after hours, erased the traces of teenage indulgence, and disappeared before the first bell rang. Richard wore the same faded uniform for years, his name patch barely legible, his shoulders hunched more from invisibility than age. He was invisible by design, a ghost among gods. But ghosts see everything. Unlike the faculty, who changed every 5 or 10 years, Richard remained. He had been there long before Dean Greaves took his throne, long before the buildings were renovated, to impress donors, long before Eli was born. He remembered the school when it still pretended to care, and he watched it rot slowly from the inside. He never forgot the day a student, nervous, breathless, once tried to confide in him. A freshman. She had witnessed something, an assault in the back of the auditorium after a school fundraiser. She was terrified. Richard had told her to go to the administration. 2 weeks later, she left the school. No explanation. No goodbye. He never made that mistake again. From that moment on, he listened, but he didn't speak. He saw it all. The teachers with trembling hands after late-night meetings with the board. The bruised knuckles of students from accidental falls. The way scholarship students vanished quietly after any confrontation with the children of donors. He noticed patterns others ignored because they were too afraid or too complicit to see. Richard didn't document anything. Not at first. But then came Eli. At first, he thought sending his son to St. Aldridge might offer him a better future, a break from the working-class curse, a chance to rise, to belong. But that illusion shattered quickly. Eli returned home quieter each day, more withdrawn, more observant. One night, Richard walked past Eli's room and saw the boy writing, not homework, but pages and pages of notes, details, names, events. And in that moment, he knew Eli was seeing it too. What followed was not an explicit agreement. There were no oaths, no dramatic scenes, just a glance exchanged at the breakfast table. A quiet shift in language. Father and son, bonded not by blood alone, but by awareness, by the knowledge of what this place truly was. Richard began to help in small ways. He pointed out which storage closets had old maintenance files. He showed Eli the tunnels beneath the school, forgotten service corridors that predated modern renovations. He taught him which staff members could be trusted, very few, and which never left paper trail. And then Richard began to gather. He found a pile of shredded documents in the administration office trash. He took them, pieced them back together over nights and weekends. Internal memos that spoke of disciplinary actions adjusted for image. Emails between Greaves and the school board discussing removing distractions before alumni fundraisers. He gave them to Eli without a word. Their alliance deepened. Every Sunday, over breakfast, they exchanged findings. Eli brought student-level insight, social structures, friend group alliances, behavioral shifts. Richard brought logistical access, who controlled digital records, where disciplinary documents were stored, which external firms managed the school's surveillance footage. Together, they became something dangerous, informed. But even more dangerous, they were patient. While rage burns fast, they were ice, steady, waiting. They didn't just want to expose a scandal. They wanted to dismantle the system that allowed it to thrive. To do that, they had to go beyond the obvious. They needed to reveal intent, culture, repetition, protection of abusers, punishment of truth-tellers, the machine behind the mask. And so, the Witness Project grew. Eli categorized every piece of data with obsessive precision. He used coded spreadsheets stored in triple encrypted drives. Richard created maps, literal blueprints of access routes, camera blind spots, emergency exits. They weren't building a case. They were building a moment, a climax so undeniable that the system couldn't suppress it. Richard had long ago stopped hoping for justice. But watching Eli, so calm, so composed, so dangerously sharp, he began to believe. Not in the school, or the system, or even the law, but in revelation. Because eventually, lies collapse under the weight of their own complexity. And truth, once spoken clearly and loudly enough, has the power to undo dynasties. One evening, as they sat reviewing notes in the garage, Richard placed a hand on Eli's shoulder. His voice, as always, was low. "When it happens," he said, "they'll come for you." Eli looked up. "I know." Richard nodded. "I'll be ready." It wasn't affection. It wasn't fear. It was commitment. They were no longer merely father and son. They were witnesses. They were architects of reckoning. And their silence was not submission. It was strategy. Hidden archives. A dossier. That shouldn't exist. There are things in every institution that are meant to be forgotten. Whispers left in corners. Mistakes quietly rewritten. At St. Aldridge, these weren't exceptions. They were policy. But Eli Calder was never supposed to remember. And yet, he remembered everything. The day the dossier truly began was uneventful on the surface. The hallways buzzed with usual pre-exam tension. Laughter echoed from the student lounge. The dean stood under a banner reading "Integrity, Excellence, Honor." And in the shadow of that lie, Eli opened a discarded envelope left behind in the janitor's cart. Inside, a photocopy of an official reprimand for a faculty member, dated and signed, then abruptly rescinded with a single line scrawled in red. Ink, handled internally, do not pursue. The faculty member in question? A guidance counselor who had tried to intervene in a bullying case involving a high donor's child. Within a week, she had resigned. Quietly. With no announcement. It was small, but to Eli, it was everything. He scanned it, tagged it, cross-referenced it with his notes. It became Entry 001 of the Witness Project, Phase 2. Archives. What followed was an operation unlike anything he had attempted before. He was no longer just observing. He was recording history the institution desperately wanted erased. And he wasn't doing it alone. Richard Calder, silent, methodical, knew where the school's bones were buried. Over 30 years of service had made him more than a janitor. He was part of the architecture. He knew where server room keys were stored, how to bypass locked staff lounges, how to restore access to computers wiped clean. He had seen it all before. Rumors smothered with scholarships, teachers threatened into compliance, student outbursts blamed on mental health, episodes when the truth was far darker. Together, father and son became historians of corruption. They gathered deleted emails from trash bin hard drives, recorded hallway conversations where teachers used phrases like, "We need to protect our image," and "That family has lawyers on speed dial." They filmed private meetings from hidden angles, using janitorial access to wall cavities and vented lighting fixtures. No one suspected the mop cart in the corner was carrying a directional mic. No one questioned the quiet student standing near the security office after hours. And when the physical evidence ran thin, they turned digital. Eli built a private server hosted off-campus under an alias. Richard created a network tunnel to allow encrypted uploads from the school grounds. They didn't just collect, they indexed, categorized, cross-checked. Each file was tagged with metadata: date, source, associated individuals, potential risk score. They created an evolving mind map of the institution's inner workings. The web of silence became visible. Who protected whom? Who enforced compliance? Who disappeared when truth got too loud? It wasn't just about student abuse anymore. They uncovered bribery, embezzlement, academic fraud, sexual misconduct covered up with non-disclosure agreements. A teacher reassigned quietly after multiple complaints. A student found unconscious in a storage room, recorded in the logs as ill from cafeteria food. An entire semester's coiffures, grades altered for the benefit of one trustee's grandchild. But what chilled Eli most was how normal it had all become. Teachers joked about trimming the rough edges. Admins rolled their eyes at new complaints. Counselors quietly coached students on how to let things go. Everyone was aware. No one was shocked. Because at St. Aldridge, corruption wasn't the cancer. It was the bloodstream. And now, for the first time, someone was documenting its anatomy. The archive became sacred. It was stored on mirrored drives, hidden in air vents, buried in Richard's basement tool chest, burned onto Blu-ray discs sealed in waterproof envelopes and mailed to a dead-drop address in another state. Every few weeks, Eli would encrypt a full backup and send it to a contact he met through an anonymous whistleblower forum. And yet, there were days he still questioned it all. Would it matter? Would anyone believe the janitor's son? But those doubts never lasted long, because then he would find another file, another erased student, another covered-up emergency room visit, another smiling photograph of a student who hadn't returned after midterms, and the fire in his chest would return. There was no turning back now. He was holding a weapon the institution didn't even know existed. But then Richard found something. A file not labeled like the others, buried on a misrouted drive attached to the Board of Trustees meeting archive. He had stumbled upon it while replacing a dead terminal in the administrative wing. It was titled in all caps, Scorched Earth Protocol 13, Preemptive Damage Control. Inside, outlines of media containment strategies, discrediting tactics for whistleblowers, lists of potential internal threats, including vague descriptions that seemed disturbingly close to Eli. There were templates for press releases, in case of scandal, drafts of legal settlements, sample parent statements to neutralize backlash. It was a blue, and now Eli knew they were prepared for war. What they had built wasn't just a record, it was ammunition, it was leverage, it was fire, waiting for air. And soon, it would burn. The anonymous letter, a bombshell sent to the nation. It didn't arrive with a scream. It came in silence. A plain manila envelope slipped through the mail slot of 23 offices across the country. No return address, no identifying marks, no fingerprints. Inside, a bomb. Its title was simple: The Witness Report, a chronicle of suppression, abuse, and systemic failure at St. Aldridge Preparatory Academy. The letter began with no dramatic introduction, just a calm, cold thesis. What follows is not an accusation, it is evidence. And the question is no longer whether this institution is guilty. It is whether you will choose to ignore it. The document was 27 pages long, with 39 attached exhibits, photographs, emails, redacted student files, maps of camera blind spots, audio transcripts, staff memos, and incident logs. It was a dossier meticulously constructed over 3 years. It bore no signature, but it spoke with a voice too sharp to be dismissed. The first wave of readers were editors, investigative reporters, and public officials. At 6:47 a.m., the first copies hit desks in Washington, D.C., New York, Sacramento, Boston. By 7:15, encrypted digital versions hit the inboxes of education oversight boards and child protection agencies. By 8:03, the first journalist tweeted, "If even 10% of this is true, St. Aldridge is finished." By 9:02 a.m., the term anonymous bombshell letter had overtaken Twitter's national trending topics. At 10:12 a.m., a whistleblower protection agency released a statement confirming the initial evidence as credible and consistent with prior silent complaints. At 10:47 a.m., Eli sat at his desk, listening to the headmaster's voice over the intercom, trembling as he announced a temporary digital lockdown, while the school responded to malicious rumors. But it was already too late. Reddit exploded with a thread titled, "I went to St. Aldridge, AMA." Hundreds of students, current and former, began sharing stories that mirrored those in the letter. Some of them cried in videos. Others posted photos of pages from the school handbook, altered mid-semester without notice. One even posted a secretly recorded video of a faculty meeting in which a teacher asked, "How far are we supposed to go to protect the donors?" And outside the walls of St. Aldridge, the world listened. Cable news anchors held up printed pages from the dossier. Talk shows dissected the implications. Lawyers commented live on the legality of the school's hush. Payments, coercive silence clauses, falsified medical reports. An emergency press conference was held by the state education commissioner. The question on every screen, who sent it? The letter contained no IP address, no traceable envelope, no clues to its origin. But its voice was undeniable, clear, precise, clinical, and it wasn't just about bullying or favoritism. It detailed systemic fraud, scholarship funds siphoned to fund executive travel, psychological abuse masked as academic rigor, the targeted expulsion of whistleblowers under fabricated disciplinary claims, a network of complicit silence stretching from the lowest hall monitors to the highest boardroom. Inside the school, panic erupted. Teachers deleted personal emails from school servers. Students were pulled into closed-door interrogations. IT scrambled to trace network activity, reviewing months of logins, print queue histories, Wi-Fi usage, but no trace of Eli because he'd never used the school systems. He'd planned for this day since the beginning. He didn't need fame. He didn't want credit. He wanted exposure. He wanted them to face what they'd hidden for decades. And now, they were. The dean, Alistair Greaves, released a statement at 12:23 p.m. calling the letter a malicious fabrication. But just 2 hours later, a former staff accountant came forward with a sworn affidavit confirming several financial irregularities cited in the report. Another teacher posted a thread detailing how she'd been asked to revise grades for the children of major donors. And the most damning moment came at 6:04 p.m. A local news anchor, shaking with emotion, read the final paragraph of the letter live on air. This isn't just about one school. It's about every place where money protects the powerful and silences the vulnerable, where institutions are built on secrets instead of truth. I am not a hero. I am not a victim. I am simply the one who refused to forget. Parents pulled their children from the school that evening. Board members resigned within hours. A state investigation was formally launched by the next morning. And still, no one knew who had written the letter. But Eli knew, as he watched the Eifug chaos unfold from the shadows of the library stacks. He knew that silence had never been his weakness. It had been his weapon. The perfect setup. The dean walks into his own trap. They called it Integrity Day, a name carefully chosen by the school's PR consultants, vetted by marketing professionals, and plastered on banners throughout campus. The event was an annual performance, a ceremony cloaked in righteousness, meant to broadcast to the world that St. Aldridge was not just elite, but ethical, a shining pillar of moral education, a beacon in a world of chaos. It was also, by design, the perfect stage for a fall. Dean Alistair Greaves had rehearsed his speech down to the breath. He knew the camera angles, the pacing, the lines that would draw applause. He was about to receive the National Ethical Leadership Award, a recognition granted by a board of equally complicit administrators from other institutions who never dared look past the surface of their own halls. It was to be aired live. Multiple networks, hundreds of thousands of viewers, but none of them expected what came next. At 12:38 p.m., just as Greaves cleared his throat and gripped the podium with the calm arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable, a technician in the back, unassuming, unnoticed, executed a file named simply initiatetruth.exe. The lights flickered. The main screen behind the dean dimmed. Then a deep synthetic voice rang out, genderless, expressionless, cold as steel. This is not a malfunction. This is a message on every screen from the auditorium to the National. Broadcast, a black screen faded in, revealing the words, "St. Aldridge is not what it claims to be." The dean froze. A beat of silence. Then the visuals began. Slide after slide of evidence. Archived emails. Altered transcripts. Whistleblower statements. Photographs of bruised students. Isolated disciplinary reports. Internal memos stamped confidential board. Access only. The narration continued. Dean Alistair Greaves oversaw a system that prioritized wealth over truth, image over justice. The following are not allegations. They are documented actions. Then, in unrelenting succession, case files began to flash across the screen. Case 016. Student A, assaulted in dormitory. No investigation. Accused student's parent. Major donor, case 022. Teacher B. Fired after reporting falsified GPA logs. Internal memo. Too disruptive to culture. Case 041. Staff C. Psychiatric leave after sustained harassment by admin. Email from Greaves. If she can't handle pressure, she doesn't belong here. The audience turned to the stage. The dean's face, flushed and rigid, betrayed a man struggling to breathe beneath the weight of exposure. "This is slander," he tried to shout, but his microphone had been disabled. And then, the final twist. The camera cut to a live feed. A podium, empty. Then, slowly, a figure stepped into frame. Eli Calder, wearing his school uniform, worn and modest, the very symbol of the student no one had seen for years. But now, everyone was watching. He took the mic, not the school mic, but his own, set up independently, connected to the stream directly. Untouchable. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't have to. They already knew. He began, You taught me to be ashamed of my silence. You built a world where the loudest voices were the ones with the most money, where truth was edited, where victims disappeared, and abusers were rebranded as assets. You told me I didn't belong. And now you'll understand why I never wanted to. He looked toward the dean. I was never trying to take your power. I just wanted to show the world what you did with it. Gasps echoed through the auditorium. No one moved. No one interrupted. He continued, I am the janitor's son. I cleaned up your messes. And now I'm showing the world what you swept under the rug. Screens across the globe flashed with real-time reactions. Commentators stunned. Influencers sharing clips. Lawyers calling for criminal investigations. Parents storming the gates of elite schools demanding transparency. And on stage, Greaves looked around, alone. No applause, no exit, just silence. The kind of silence that swallows everything. And in that silence, Eli stood taller than anyone had ever seen him. No longer invisible, no longer mocked. He was not just the boy who endured, he was the author of the fall. And his letter wasn't a protest. It was a sentence. Final. Absolute. Unignorable. Silent justice. When the weak become unstoppable. The halls of St. Aldridge sounded different after the broadcast. The silence wasn't born of fear anymore. It was something else. A breath being held. A system waiting to be judged by the world it once manipulated. And the world was watching. The morning after the event, that would later be described as the most catastrophic ethical collapse in modern academic history, investigators arrived on campus, flanked by legal teams and policy experts. They were methodical, faces stern, movements efficient. They didn't need dramatic entrances. Their badges spoke for them. Their presence alone unraveled the last threads of denial. Dean Alistair Greaves didn't resist. He didn't argue. He didn't even pack his things. Because by then, he understood. There was no fight left to wage. He was escorted from his office, through the back exit. No farewell. No applause. Just whispers behind drawn blinds and a dozen cameras waiting outside the school gates. But what followed was not chaos. It was awakening. For the first time in decades, teachers spoke without fear. Staff, who had tiptoed through bureaucracy for years, now filled inboxes with statements, forwarded emails, offered testimony. Some confessed to their own silence. Others shared how they'd tried and failed to fight back. It was messy, but it was real. The school board attempted damage control. They released a carefully sanitized statement about ongoing investigations and a commitment to rebuilding trust. But trust is not rebuilt with PR. It is rebuilt with people. And the people were no longer hiding. In classrooms, the atmosphere had shifted. Once stoic instructors now paused to acknowledge the trauma. Students who never spoke now led discussions. Anonymous surveys flooded the internal portals, filled with voices that had waited too long to be heard. And within that new wave of courage, a movement was born. They called themselves the Witnesses. It wasn't organized. It wasn't official. It didn't need to be. It was a current, slow, growing, undeniable. White ribbons on backpacks. Notes slipped into lockers. You're not alone anymore. Posters with phrases from the anonymous letter. The silence is over. Assemblies turned into forums, private group chats into public coalitions. Students from rival social circles now stood side by side, unified by a single revelation. They had all suffered under the same illusion, that their voices didn't matter, that the system was too big, that resistance was useless. But someone had shattered that illusion, and now resistance had become identity. They demanded representation in school governance, demanded accountability from faculty, demanded transparency in funding. They demanded that the world stop pretending St. Aldridge was exceptional for the wrong reasons. Other schools began to notice. Reports of similar structures began surfacing across the country. Investigations opened. National education policy groups began holding emergency summits. The Department of Education launched a task force to audit disciplinary trends in elite private institutions. Eli's dossier wasn't just a local storm. It had become a map, a template for exposure. Back at St. Aldridge, Eli kept to himself. He declined interviews, left meetings early, gave no statements. He wasn't interested in being the face of a revolution. He had never wanted to be seen, but now he couldn't be unseen. His presence in the halls was met with reverent silence. Not the silence of avoidance, but of acknowledgement. Every student, every teacher, every administrator who passed him understood. He had changed everything. He had done what no board member, no parent, no politician had dared to do. He had told the truth. Richard Calder, still the janitor, walked the halls with the same cart, the same keys, the same quiet gait. But when he entered a room, conversations paused not out of condescension, but out of respect. Rumors about his role in exposing the school's secrets swirled like legend. He confirmed none of them. But sometimes, when a student passed him in the hallway and said, "Thank you," he nodded. That was enough, and the legacy of their actions didn't end there. State legislatures began drafting laws to protect student whistleblowers. Legal clinics formed to assist families navigating retaliation from private institutions. Mental health initiatives were launched, modeled on the gaps exposed in Eli's report. The dominoes fell fast. But none of it happened because Eli shouted. It happened because he waited, because he listened, because he documented. And then, at the precise moment when the world couldn't ignore the silence any longer, he let the truth speak for itself. The weak had not only endured, they had become the architects of the reckoning, and justice, once believed to be a distant myth within the marble walls of privilege, had finally arrived, quiet, precise, and unstoppable. The cost of truth. Being right doesn't make you safe. The roar of exposure had faded. The fire Eli had lit had consumed the silence, revealed the rot, and shaken the walls of one of the most untouchable academic institutions in the country. But when the flames die down, the smoke lingers. And in that smoke, truth loses its clarity. For Eli Calder, victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like isolation. The letter had gone viral. The world had watched in disbelief as a student, unrecognized, unnoticed, unloved, had dismantled a fortress of power with words, files, and patience. Reporters called him a whistleblower hero. Civil rights organizations quoted his closing lines. Social media turned his name into a symbol. But symbols are easier to honor than humans are to understand. Because for all the accolades thrown his way online, the day-to-day inside St. Aldridge had changed in ways that were harder to celebrate. Yes, the dean was gone. Yes, investigations were underway. Yes, systems had begun to crumble. But Eli was still walking those halls. And now, instead of being mocked, he was feared. People didn't know how to look at him. Students who once ridiculed him now crossed the hallway when he approached. Teachers greeted him with overly formal smiles, unsure whether he was a student or a threat. Administrators spoke in rehearsed tones, careful to avoid language that might one day end up in another dossier. He had become legend, and legend is lonely. He sat alone at lunch again, not because no one wanted to be seen with him, but because no one knew how. Some students whispered conspiracies. Others idolized him without understanding him. A few accused him of ruining the school. "My early decision got delayed because of this drama," one senior muttered in the hallway. "My dad says the college board might flag us for scrutiny now." To them, the problem wasn't the corruption. It was that the curtain had been pulled back, and they hated the one who pulled it. Some parents sent emails to the board suggesting Eli be transferred. "He's become a distraction," one wrote. "My daughter feels unsafe knowing a student has access to that kind of information." They called it concern, but Eli recognized it for what it was: fear of the powerless becoming powerful. Still, he remained. Not because he had something to prove, but because what he had started wasn't finished. The fallout from the letter had spread far beyond the campus. Other schools were now facing pressure. Former students from around the country were sending him encrypted messages, sharing their own stories, their own evidence. Victims who had stayed silent for years found in Eli a mirror, not a savior, just proof that they weren't alone. E.T. responded to as many as he could, not with advice, but with structure. He shared how to document safely, how to store evidence securely, how to build networks of support before going public. He taught others to avoid the mistakes he made, to protect themselves better than he ever could. And while the world moved on to the next scandal, the next outrage, Eli stayed in the background, watching, advising, building. He became the foundation of a movement he never intended to lead. Students from multiple states formed encrypted forums to exchange strategies for institutional accountability. Some called it the Witness Network. Others simply called it Calder's Law, the unspoken rule that no institution is safe from the truth. And through it all, Eli endured the cost. His name, now etched into national awareness, came with baggage. He was denied a summer internship for creating instability. A college recruiter asked if he would be too polarizing on campus. A school official accidentally leaked his disciplinary history from years before, trying to paint him as troubled. But he didn't stop, because he had never done it for approval. He had done it so that no other student would sit silently with a mouth full of questions and a heart full of fear, wondering if the system that was supposed to protect them was designed to erase them. And yes, he missed anonymity. Yes, he missed safety. But there was something else now, something heavier, more sacred: responsibility. Because the truth doesn't end when it's spoken. It echoes, and someone has to stand still and listen to the echoes, guide them, shape them, shield them. Eli Calder became that someone, not because he wanted to, but because no one else would. A new voice, turning pain into a platform. Pain teaches you to speak, but only after you've learned what it's like to scream into a void. Eli Calder had spent years being that void, an empty chair in the classroom, a name no one remembered, a shadow cleaning up after the privileged. When his letter exposed the rot at St. Aldridge, the world called him brave. But bravery doesn't erase trauma. Truth doesn't restore normalcy. And fame doesn't protect you from being alone in a crowded room. What Eli learned after exposing, the truth was that victory can be deafening. Reporters praised him. Lawyers referenced his dossier. His name appeared in academic journals, on conference panels, in youth activist pamphlets. But in the quiet of his room, Away from the glow of screens and headlines, he still felt the same thing he had felt before it all began. Helpless. Because he knew what no one else had seen. The system wasn't dead. It was just silent. St. Aldridge had lost a battle, not a war. New policies were written. Diversity slogans were printed on brochures. Students were invited into reform dialogues. But the foundation remained. The same network of money, fear, and image that Eli had uncovered was rebuilding itself, slicker and smarter than before. So he made a decision, not to speak louder, but to make space for others to speak. The platform began as an idea scribbled in the margins of his old witness journal, a place for voices they can't erase. He spent weeks mapping the architecture, how to host securely, how to ensure anonymity, how to make it untraceable. He built firewalls, created dummy accounts, tested entry points. He used everything he had learned infiltrating one system to now protect others from theirs. And then it went live. Project Witness. A bare-bones website, almost monastic in design. No logos, no mission statements, just a submission box and one line of text. Tell your story. We'll hold the silence for you. The first few days were quiet. Then came a single entry. Then 5 more. Then 20. Then hundreds. Stories from students who had been expelled for emotional instability after reporting harassment. From staff who were forced to falsify records. From parents gaslighted by polished administrators and legalese. From survivors. From the forgotten. From the angry. From the broken. Each entry was reviewed manually. Eli read every single one. He archived them, tagged them by category: retaliation, suppression, fraud, abuse, manipulation, neglect. And with permission, he began to publish. The entries were raw, unedited. Some were barely coherent, typed through tears or rage. Others were structured like reports, cold, analytical, damning. But all of them carried the same pulse. They thought I would stay quiet. The site spread quietly, shared through forums, encrypted chats, word of mouth. It didn't go viral. It's why you infiltrated. And that made it more dangerous, because it reached the people who needed it most. Not the media, but the silenced Eli added a second layer. Video submissions, narrated anonymously. He layered their words over ambient visuals. Empty hallways, flickering lights, closed doors. He never used real footage from St. Aldridge. The point wasn't exposure, it was empathy. Each video ended with the same text: "You're not alone anymore." Subscribers grew. Volunteers appeared. Law students offering to verify documents. Counselors contributing mental health resources. Ethical hackers testing the site's security for free. A community began to form in the background. Nameless, faceless, but fiercely loyal. They weren't fighting one school anymore. They were mapping a pattern. Journalists began citing Project Witness as a source. Investigations were launched. Schools across the country were forced to respond. Some called it a movement. Others called it a threat. One private school network labeled the site as a cyber activist cell and blocked access from campus Wi-Fi. Eli didn't respond because he didn't need to. The platform spoke for itself. It didn't demand reform. It documented reality. And reality, when preserved and shared, is a force no institution can outlast. Eli never took credit. His name was never listed. When asked in private chats if he was behind it, he never answered. Because this was never about him. The moment it became about him, the platform would lose its power. Because Project Witness wasn't built on personality. It was built on pain. On hundreds of kids who had stared at the ceiling at night, wondering if anyone would ever believe them. And now, someone did. Not just one person. Thousands. What Eli had once written in secret notebooks, hidden beneath loose tiles, was now a living archive of resistance. It grew daily. It evolved. And in that evolution, Eli found something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. He didn't speak often anymore. He didn't need to. He was listening, and the world had finally learned to listen with him. The final page. The secret that fueled the fire. The world knew his name now. Eli Calder. The boy who brought down a tyrant with a letter. The student who cracked the walls of an elite fortress using nothing but patience and precision. The symbol of a new era of resistance, justice, and truth inside the academic elite. But they never saw the origin. They never saw her. To them, it started with a boy who was invisible. But before Eli Calder became the ghost in the hallways, there was Mira, his sister. She was everything he wasn't. Radiant, warm, eager to be accepted. Mira was the one who believed that systems could be changed from the inside, that kindness could outlast cruelty, that intelligence and empathy could open any door. She arrived at St. Aldridge with hope in her backpack, and it destroyed her. She was one of the few to earn a full scholarship, a student who didn't come from legacy, donations, or connections. At first, she excelled. Teachers praised her essays. Classmates sought her answers. But soon, whispers began about her clothes, her background, the fact that her father, then already a janitor at the school, was seen on campus. She became a target. Slow at first, then vicious. Rumors, lies, isolation. Then something happened. Something Eli never fully uncovered. A report. A complaint. Mira had tried to speak up. She went to the counselor, then the dean. And then, just like that, her file was altered. Her grades began to drop mysteriously. Her assignments were missing. One day, she came home and told Eli, "They're erasing me while I'm still here." Weeks later, she withdrew. No warning, no closure. She told her parents she needed time. But Eli saw the fracture in her voice, in her smile, in the way she sat in the garden behind the school, on that stone bench beneath the old oak, staring at nothing. She said it was the only place that didn't lie. And then, she was gone. No note, just silence. Just an obituary wrapped in politeness. A bright student with a promising future. Just another tragedy. The school held a moment of silence, then moved. On, no investigation, no inquiry, no consequences. And Eli, young, voiceless, and shattered, promised himself something that day. They don't get to forget her. Not like this. So when he arrived at St. Aldridge years later, wearing the same uniform, stepping into the same halls that had swallowed his sister whole, it was never about fitting in. It was about remembering. He didn't come for revenge. He came for truth. Every piece of evidence collected, every audio file stored, every late night spent digging through administrative backdoors, fake smiles, and digital footprints. All of it was for her, not to make her proud, to keep his promise. But the world didn't know this, because Eli never told them. He let the world believe the fire was his. He let the headlines focus on the scandal, the dean, the dossier. He let himself be reduced to a symbol because he knew something more sacred lived behind the curtain. The final page. It was never published, never scanned, never uploaded. It was written by hand, an artifact in an age of digital. Outrage! It was addressed not to the press, or the students, or the board, but to Mira. He wrote it the night before he released the letter to the world, by candlelight, in the same room they once shared. The text, written in deliberate strokes, read, "You once told me, the worst pain is not when they hurt you. It's when they pretend you were never there. They did that to you, Mira. They tried to erase you. But I kept every trace. I collected every echo. I turned the silence they left behind into something too loud to bury again. They will say I did this for justice, but we both know why I really did it. Because I saw you. I always did. And they don't get to forget you just because it's easier. I love you. I miss you. And I hope, wherever you are, you can finally rest." He folded the page, walked to the garden before dawn, placed the letter under the bench where she used to sit, and left it there, unmarked, unclaimed, and untouched. Because that final page wasn't a revelation for the world. It was a goodbye, a release, a promise kept in silence. And for Eli, it was the only part of the letter that truly mattered. Because long before the nation listened, before the school trembled, before Project Witness exploded across the country, there was only a boy and a sister, and a truth so unbearable, it became his entire reason to keep breathing. Legacy of the janitor's son. How one boy changed everything. In the months that followed, the ripples became waves. St. Aldridge did not recover. It transformed. A new board was elected. Policies were rewritten. Transparency committees were established with student seats. Every classroom was fitted with anonymous feedback systems. Counselors were replaced, and the old culture of silence was named for what it truly was: institutional gaslighting. But even as the school remade its image, the echo of what happened never faded. Across the country, whispers turned into voices, voices into demands, demands into policy. Lawmakers, once detached from educational trauma, began citing testimony from Project Witness. New federal protections for student whistleblowers were introduced. Education grants were redirected to create trauma-informed counselor programs. Colleges started accepting Project Witness documentation as valid appeal evidence in disciplinary cases. The map of power was redrawn, not just at St. Aldridge, but everywhere the story had reached. And always in the margins of every article, behind every headline, one name reappeared: Eli Calder, the janitor's son, the boy no one invited to the table, the shadow in the hallway who took notes while everyone else looked away. But Eli never returned to the spotlight. He never stepped forward for applause. He declined every award, ignored every camera, and continued to run the platform anonymously, updating, moderating, mentoring. His name became something larger than recognition. It became principle. Teachers began referencing the Calder Protocol, a method of documenting institutional misconduct based on the system he built. Students described acts of resistance as pulling an Eli. Some schools even added excerpts from his letter to ethics curricula, citing it as the most effective modern case study on internal whistleblowing. But none of this would have mattered to him. What mattered was that no one else would be erased, the way Mira had been. And slowly, it became clear that Eli had not just exposed a system. He had designed its replacement, a decentralized network of accountability, a culture that taught students their voices weren't liabilities, they were evidence. He gave institutions a reason to fear silence, not manipulate it. And he proved something that no reform, no audit, no headline ever could, that the overlooked are often the most dangerous. Because they see everything. Because they've been hurt quietly for so long that when they act, when they finally act, they are not guessing, they are precise. Eli Calder wasn't loud, he wasn't popular, he wasn't supposed to win, and that's what made his legacy permanent. Not because he changed the world by shouting, but because he changed it by watching, by remembering, by believing, when no one else did, that the truth was worth surviving long enough to tell. And that one act, done with quiet hands and a heart still broken, reshaped an entire generation's understanding of power. The janitor's son didn't just fight back. He redefined what fighting back could look like.